What are some mistakes that either you or parents make when communicating with dyslexic children?
Okay, well, so it's not really necessarily that it's a mistake, but just choosing better wording. So like, and I'm not saying this at all to pick on you, because this is this is correct terminology, right? But like in our intro, you said something about the disorder, right?
Probably, yeah. That's what you heard. Yeah.
Well, I don't. Maybe you didn't say it in your intro, but
I did. I said there's still so much gray area within the disorder.
Yes.
You said that?
Okay. Yes. Okay. So that's the terminology that everyone uses, right? Well, if you have a disorder, there's something wrong with you.
Okay. Makes sense.
You know, and there's nothing wrong with my kid. I mean, sure, he makes mistakes and he doesn't always do things perfectly, and you know, he's learning, growing human being, but there's nothing wrong with him. Like, he has a learning difference, but there's nothing wrong with him. And so just like having an awareness, and that's not just dyslexia, but that's anything. We call them disabilities, we call them disorders, like just changing our terminology to where we're not like taking away, but changing our terminology to where we're empowering, because he learns differently, but he also, like, he sees things so much differently than I do. So that gives him the ability to solve problems in ways that sometimes I would never even think of. Right.
Wow.
It's not, he doesn't have a disorder. He has a learning difference. And like, he has a language processing difference is what he has. So just little things like that. And there's a really good, it doesn't talk about this specifically, but there's a really good book that I think is every parent, I think, should read. It's called, I think it's called The Psychology of Mindset. Like, mindset is the big bold word of it, but if you just Google mindset, I think it's Psychology of Mindset. It's by, her name is Carol, I think it's Carol S, and then her last name starts with a D. But it's all about the difference between a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. And it's things like, a lot of times we'll tell kids, like, they'll get an A on a paper, or they'll, you know, get 100% on their spelling test or whatever. And we'll be like, you're so smart. Like, you're amazing, right? And we tell girls all the time, like, you're so pretty, right? And that's like, we want to know we're pretty, right? Like, don't stop telling us we're pretty. But tell us other stuff about us too, right? Like, you know, with your kid, don't just always tell them that they're so smart. Like, I love how hard you worked on memorizing those words. I love how, you know, like, you really put a lot of effort in that. Like, you really persevered. Like, what character traits did they display that made them successful?
I love that.
In the book, it really talks about, if you just talk about, like, wow, you're so smart, or you're so fast, you know, if they ran a race or whatever, then when they don't win the race, or when they come to a point in school when it's hard and they don't, you know, they get a B or a C or, you know, whatever, like, they freeze up, and then they start questioning, am I really not smart? Were they just saying it because it was my mom? Like, were they lying to me? And they'll stop, and then they won't go on. When you have the kids who were told, you're such a hard worker, like, you're a good problem solver, those kids, it's like a puzzle to them, and they want to, like, I can figure this out. Like, they'll go at it and try to do better, because it's that mindset of growth has been, like, implanted in their brain, and that's what they're going to go after. So everybody should read that book. And in that book, because I know a lot of parents don't like to read, a lot of people in general don't like to read, one, you can get audiobooks. Audible's a fantastic thing, but in that book specifically, there is a section that is how to apply the psychology of mindset when you're parenting. There's a section that's like how to apply the psychology of mindset if you're a school teacher, how do you do it in the classroom? If you're an employer, how do you do it with your employees? If you're married, how do you do it in your marriage? So you don't have to read the whole book. Like, you can just pick the part that applies to you. You can skip around. Wow. Super fantastic. In the way that we talk to ourselves too.
Very cool. I love that. I had just heard about something like that a few weeks ago, where they were talking about not praising the outcome, but praising the actions that created the outcome.
100%.
Yes. Yes. I love that you're reminding me of that. And it 100% makes sense the way that you explained it,
Mhm.
especially for children.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm thinking of my fiance has a daughter and she's beautiful, and everybody tells her that she's beautiful, including her dad, all the time. And I keep telling him, you need to stop complimenting her on that one thing. You need to start complimenting her on other things that she's doing, such as her brain. You know what's going on in her brain,
Yes.
because but this is even deeper than that. So I'm excited to share that with him, because I did not share it with him when I kind of forgot about it. So thank you for that. So some suggestions as far as, so when we're talking, just to correct myself, talking about dyslexia, is saying learning difference, is that what, I don't know how to, I apologize for my lack of kosherness here, but like, speaking of dyslexia, calling it a learning difference, is that appropriate? Is that what you
Yeah.
said?
Yeah. That's what I would call it, because
Okay.
it's a learning difference, or that's the, in my opinion, that's probably the best way to put it. It's a language processing difference, but like they learn differently, so they need to, like in the classroom, they need to be taught differently, so that, and if the regular classroom is taught with the multisensory same approach as a dyslexic kid, they're still going to get it. And you don't have to be dyslexic. So there's even kids who maybe aren't necessarily dyslexic, but maybe they're just not part of those kids who picked up reading through osmosis. They'll learn the same way as a dyslexic kid as well. So you actually will pick up more kids learning. So that's why I like to call it a learning difference, because it really impacts how life plays out for them in the classroom. And that was one of the struggles, like why we were having a hard time figuring out like what was going on, is because dyslexia, it's a neurological difference. So it's basically their brain just wired differently. And so it's this brain thing, but it like there's no medicine that you take for it, right? Like, so there's no prescription, there's no take this pill and your brain will process language what we consider normal. It just affects you in the classroom. You have to be taught differently in the classroom, which is educational, but educational people don't do diagnoses because that's medical. And so it's just like this space that they fall into that sometimes doesn't always get recognized. And unfortunately for us, living in Kansas, at the time that my son was going through it, Kansas was one of 3 states that did not recognize dyslexia in the classroom, which is why when I kept trying to, like, what's going on, like it's not something that's, because it's a brain difference. So you need to talk to your doctor, but the doctor's like, okay, yeah, he's dyslexic, but that's pretty much all I can give you to actually like get, stuff to make life better for him. It's stuff that needs to happen in the classroom. And I lived in a state where it wasn't recognized. So it was up to the teacher that I had and the building that I had and the district that you're in as to whether or not your kid in your classroom is getting what they need to get.
Do you know what the percentages are? Like, as far as who has it? Is it like a 5% of the population, or?
Yeah. So, this is something that is really key, right? So 1 in 5 students are affected by dyslexia. 1 in 5.
What made me think about that is, I figured it was a pretty decent percentage. But when you were talking about calling it a learning difference, and then I started thinking to myself, like, who said that the way the teachers teach is correct? So, like, why is it dyslexia is different? And then I started thinking of all the other things like ADHD or ADD. It's like, when you really think about it, it really isn't a learning difference. Like, we all completely learn differently, because that's 1 out of 5. How many kids have ADD? And then how many kids have ADHD? That again is probably another 1 out of 5, 1 out of 5. So then before you know it, there's only like 2 out of 5 are actually learning normal.
Yeah. Yeah. And what is normal anyway, right? Like
That's what I'm saying.
who
Yeah.
defines normal? Who defines normal?
Yes.
And that's like a huge problem. And this is where like I think there needs to be lots of change. Like it comes up from like way high up in like the teachers when they get educated to go teach, right? So they're not, you know, they're being taught how to teach those kids who basically learn reading through osmosis. And I think it's Louisa Moat. She's a dyslexia like guru person who is one of the early pioneers of like figuring out what they needed. She said, teaching reading, it really is rocket science because you have all these different, we all learn differently. Some of us learn more auditory, some of us learn more visually, some of us more kinesthetic, which for the dyslexic kid, they need the multisensory. So if you come and approach it through like two of those avenues where it's like auditory and kinesthetic, so like I'm telling you the instructions, but I'm also having you do it while you listen to me or do it while you watch me. When you start tying in a second input, their learning increases. When you tie in all three, it like really increases a lot, which is why they need the multisensory approach because we need to access all those areas of the brain. But yeah, who defines the normal? It's somebody who writes curriculum for, you know, teachers going through college, and then you go to college to be a teacher, then you do your student teaching, and then you apply and get a job, and you don't know, are you going to be teaching kindergarten or are you going to be teaching, you know, fourth grade? And so, you know, it's different with what needs to be taught, how it needs to be taught. And then it's not just the teachers that need, you know, training. The administrators need training because the teacher needs to know what's going on in the classroom, like what needs to happen for those dyslexic kids. The administrator needs to recognize when they go into the classroom to observe, they need to be able to recognize what's happening or what's not happening in the learning process for the kids. So they can, you know, do some correction or some input or bring in training for their building. But they, you know, they're not always trained in it, especially like those lower, because that's going to be like your first, second, third grade. After third grade, they don't teach reading anymore. You read to learn. So if you don't get it all like figured out by third grade, you're behind the rest of the way until somebody steps in and says, hey, wait a second, you didn't get some instruction. You have some serious gaps. Let's help fix that. And it's a lot harder to fix at that point, right? So there's a small window to be able to recognize, hey, we need this, and to get it, where if we just had it in all the buildings, it'd be fantastic. Or at least had it accessible to where maybe it's not in all the classrooms, but we've got classrooms where we can get it and we can get those kids who need it in the right classroom so that they get it. And then, you know,
it's like, how much more difficult would it be just to teach like that though? Like, I don't feel like it would be that much more difficult.
Right. So that can certainly be done. And there are some schools that are doing that. But you are going to have some kids who are more severely dyslexic, and they're going to need a little bit more like 1-to-1 or like 1-to-3 ratio with some student and teacher. So there does need to be some more. But yeah, you can absolutely change things that happen in the classroom to make it not to where not as many kids are falling through the cracks. And then so the other thing with with training, the kids who do have to go get help outside of the classroom, but yet in the school system, they're going to the resource teacher. And unfortunately, sometimes the resource teacher has less education than some of the other teachers in the building. And so we need to make sure that those kids who need the most the most highly trained instructor, we need to make sure that they're getting the highest trained instructor and not the least trained. And then the last thing that I'll say on that is, you know, like it's 1 in 5 kids are affected by dyslexia. We need to have some lawmakers more educated so that we can have some things in place across the board. So it doesn't matter what state you live in, what school district you're in, the laws are there and the interventions are there because the lawmakers make the laws as to what you're able to get, what schools are able to do and get away with, not get away with. There are situations and things in place for autism. And I think that's great. I don't think you should take any of that away, right? But autism affects 1 in 8. And we have things in place for those kids, right?
Yeah.
If you are dyslexic, 1 in 5 of our kids are dyslexic, and we don't have the things in place to protect those kids and make sure that those kids are getting the things that they need across the board, regardless of where they live in the country.
Wow. Yeah, I didn't even think about autism. That's another one.
Mm-hmm. But they, you know, and I'm not for sure exactly how it's been parents probably advocating for their kids, saying my kid needs this, and you know, there's been laws have been put in place so that there are things, and most schools have things in place to help kids with autism. And I'm sure there's places on the spectrum of autism where it is falling behind and they're not getting it. But with dyslexia, we're just so far behind as far as making all of that stuff happen. But yeah,
Well, I'm also,
around forever, have it.
yeah, I'm also just thinking that, you know, there's probably so many parents that, to no fault of their own. I mean, people work and people have lives and they have multiple kids and they don't always have the patience to sit down and figure it out. But I can't even imagine how many children are falling through the cracks unknowingly and then getting whooped at home, you know, or penalized at home or grounded at home for their grades, and never really being able to get past that hump because there's an issue that no one really is talking about or knows about.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow.